dance community,
connects people,
brings people together,
collaborate,
culture, and
makes the connections.
have that community around them.
concepts,
create opportunities for all of our community.
passion for dance music.
Pilerats, Stony Roads, Howl and Echoes, Cool Accidents, In The Mix. These are just a few of the blogs and websites no longer operating and sharing their voice in the dwindling landscape of Australian music journalism. The days of print media are long, long over, and media has had to quickly adapt to the changing needs and desires of advertisers and consumers who are keeping them afloat. Mark Zuckerberg quickly became almost every journalist's actual boss, with Meta quickly and completely dominating the flow of information and news online. While this was a radical change in of itself when Facebook started in 2004, this completely changed the way that news was distributed and valued over the following 2 decades. The decline of print media is more than just a perception. It's backed by hard-hitting statistics. According to a Pew Research Center study, US newspaper circulation fell to its lowest level since 1940, with a decline of about 8% in 2020 alone. Advertising revenue, the lifeblood of print media, has also seen a staggering drop. In the last decade, print ad revenue has plummeted by over 60%, making it increasingly difficult for publications to sustain their operations. Newspapers are now third on the list of media avenues from which local advertisers buy, sitting at an average of 27% of budgets. This is considerably lower than Google ads at 39% and social media ads at 59%. Social media's value is only continuing to rise. In 2023, Facebook's parent company Meta's total ad revenue amounted to $135 billion USD, up from $116 billion the previous year. Many within the music industry broadly will often say that working in music is only possible with a secondary source of income. But would you have thought you'd ever say that about journalism? This lack of ad revenue going to publishers is now not only a problem that smaller media organisations are facing. Companies such as the Nine Network, which just recently announced the massive layoffs of its staff, including ceasing Australian operations for publications like Vice, Refinery29, Lifehacker, Kotaku, and more, are also feeling the pinch. But when we say the media landscape is shrinking, what do we actually mean when there's arguably more media than ever? My name is Jack Colquhoun. On behalf of EMC, I'll be speaking with a whole variety of industry professionals and tastemakers. Cyclone Wehner is a journalist specialising in dance, R&B and hip-hop, who's written for NME, The Music, Junkie and many more, and has interviewed the likes of Daft Punk, Beyonce, and the list goes on. As a writer with a long and successful career, she knows better than most just how much the media landscape has changed.
The biggest change I've observed domestically is huge contraction in the media, music media, and a loss of that specialist coverage. And basically the reason for that is social media. Social media came along and promoters and labels took all their ad spends to social media, Facebook particularly, and that revenue was what funded journalism. But the promoters, the labels, the publicists, they still want that quality coverage, So basically the money goes to Facebook and social media, but they're not putting any money or investing any money in the media. So, basically you're seeing just this huge contraction. That was why 3D folded. And there was actually talk of bringing back another dance title, SBA. The owners of the music did, I believe, consider that. But they just didn't think there'd be the industry support there. So I'm probably like the last specialist dance electronic writer of my era, still working. Everyone else has left. But that is why you're seeing that contraction, and it's not done yet. It's still, pretty much you're going to see more and more and more. But it's all down to the fact that money, even recovery money from the government, is all ending up with Facebook and similar, through marketing spends.
It could be easy to think that this is doomsday, that there's no longer someone with a passion for news or music at the helm of what we're reading, and that reading is even off the menu. To an extent, you might be right, but the media landscape, as much as it might be shrinking, is also expanding rapidly by the second. Julie Fenwick is a freelance journalist who's written for Vice, NME, Rolling Stone, ID and Acclaim. As she explains, just because it's not written down doesn't mean that people aren't still talking.
I think there are thousands of voices, new voices on TikTok, Substack,
Whether these people are trained in journalism is another thing. But I think there's definitely more opportunities for people to have voices and more opportunities for people to write things and have more niche audiences.
While social media may not have finished evolving just yet, much of the damage has already been done. Not only to legacy businesses unable to adapt, but to trusted local publications who haven't had the power to compete. Stoney Roads was one such case. Started in 2007 by Andrew Cotman and Dave Ross, but largely wrapping operations just last year, Stoney provided, like so many independent blogs of the early social media era, a local nuance, coverage, and presence that bigger publications simply couldn't. As Andrew explains, there's less room for independence than ever before.
On the one side, with it shrinking means less competitors. Obviously, as a business thing, that's like pretty helpful. But also impact changes as well. And Australia just struggles with the size of the industry. It's not just music, but it could be fashion, food, everything across the board. We don't necessarily have the population to support a really broad, diverse scene. There's so much noise. There's so much input. We're yelled at every day on social media from 1,000 different brands and people and organizations. And before, maybe you had a little bit more space to breathe and pick and choose and curate, and there was a sense of discovery. And now it's just whatever lands in front of us, that becomes what we're consuming. There isn't necessarily a lot of room for independent publications, more so, like Stoney Roads. And you just got to adapt, you got to evolve.
But what are the real ramifications of this? Many could argue that album or gig reviews have never been less relevant. TikTok and Instagram provide all too many a festival recap, and the biggest artists are still regularly seen in interviews and across social media. But what about local music? Melody Forghani is the founder of twnty, an Australian-born, partially London-based music PR company with only a handful of employees. She and her team have worked on major campaigns for artists like Anna Luno, Sophie, Speed, and many more. As she explains, not having a local presence for media means it's harder than ever for local musicians to get heard.
There was such a huge attention, especially at the time when I started. Flume had just released his debut album. We'd just started working with Lord on her debut album. Chet Faker was coming up. Gautier was kind of like rounding out his big album at the time. And yeah, there was like a really healthy electronic space, especially. There was a lot of national kind of outlets that covered a real broad range of things as well. A lot more fascinations and corners of the internet that you could dive into for particular niches as well. So there's a lot of options. And now, you know, there's people that have to pause things because they can't manage doing it for free on the side in addition to their full-time jobs anymore. Or there's, you know, outlets that have gone to really experiment with the way that they've needed to bring on like ads and things and go between like heavy on the commercial side and losing their identity to trying to go back to the other side of things and not getting any readers. And then you've got, yeah, like other companies that keep buying other companies, and then you're losing that individual voice that each outlet had that was the thing that was the most meaningful part of it, you know, like music coverage and reviews and like just general news stories are great, but what makes a real difference is when someone that you trust has a really particular opinion about something, good or bad, you know, you went to them for that like credible source. And I think that's the saddest part, that we're losing all these different diverse voices. I'm seeing it in a very obvious way, and it's made my job as a music publicist a lot harder.
But when there's so much music coming out all the time, are bigger publishers a good filter for what's decent? In many ways, the size of media organisations has meant that when artists do get spoken about, featured, interviewed, and more, the benefits have never been bigger. In many instances, outside of individual artists, the ever-expanding impact of social media has meant that many musical subcultures have never been more popular. Ideals rooted in cultures like electronic and punk music, expressions of gender across many genres and scenes, fashion, and so much more has never been more available than it is online. Shivani Sharma is the newly appointed Community Engagement Manager at EMC and Sydney City Manager for Resident Advisor, one of the world's largest dance music publications. She explains what artists, grassroots collectives, and cultures stand to gain.
Love a good live stream because it makes things accessible, and I think it's amazing to be able to have that accessibility from a screen. But I think the way people are engaging with music through those big media platforms has, I think it's really changed the way we're engaging with our music. You know, the whole tension between the phones out or like being behind the DJ booth, and I think the etiquette around that has really influenced the way people are going out. I also think that it's also done a lot to, platform a lot of grassroots DJs. Like, we've seen Deeper, like we've seen Seafram on these live streams, and they run like big collectives out of Eora and Nam. So I think it's really great to be able to get their name out. We've seen a huge rise in online scenes, which has been amazing, and they're run by, smaller collectives. So obviously not a lot of money there because they are on the smaller side of things, and it's more community initiative, right? They've reached out to a bunch of people in a specific environment and asked them to contribute something, and then that's gone out online, which is really, really cool.
But with so many voices competing in the same spaces, how do media organisations really choose who's in their sites? The tension between the opportunities presented by big media and the risks that they expose local music to is an area that, regardless of your support, desperately needs interrogation. This interrogation, unfortunately, is often only undertaken by people working within or directly with the industry. Media is only becoming a bigger part of our lives as the years go on. TikTok has stolen the support and attention of many, countless streaming services compete for our ears, and the news cycle has become all the more demanding of our day-to-day time. But if the writers, hosts, performers, critics, and more are the ones making everything, why are they no longer being appreciated in this shrinking media landscape? Arun Ramanathan is the director of Mixmag Asia, a booming market for electronic music globally, and one of Mixmag's most blossoming outlets, with the original publication having started in London in the 1980s.
I think from this year, the brand first started in Bangkok about 10 years ago. It then got handed over to, it's a franchise, so the brand then got handed over to a company in Hong Kong about 5 years ago, and that's when I got involved. I think Mixmag Asia, being a fairly young brand that's part of a legacy brand, gives us that opportunity to be a little bit different and serve a slightly different purpose that's very niche, it's very angled, which comes with its own challenges, of course. But at the same time, I think it gives us that reason to break the walls of things that haven't been really done before, just have conversations that haven't been had in the region before. I see an opportunity for it to grow. And that's kind of why I've taken this next step in trying to evolve Mixmag Asia and potentially other publications that we may do as well into like what I think is going to be a new era. I mean, the traditional media isn't the way forward anymore. And I think it's time to adapt, but adapt with a sense of purpose. Just because we're future forward in terms of the way we think or approach, it doesn't mean that there's no sense of preservation either. And we are talking about culture as like our base of content here, right? And culture can't just be a forward-moving thing. I think there's cyclical behavior behind it too. And in order to have that, you want a sense of preservation behind things. You do want to connect the dots between what happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago to what's still happening now. Electronic music's a unique one for me because it's heavily technology-based. So it goes without saying it's going to evolve. But, we've got purists, we've got underground heads who care a lot about certain things. And how do you keep that demographic and that audience happy while still looking forward to the audience that's coming next?
In his opinion, the creatives behind the media we love and appreciate are slowly coming out on top.
Creatives are the king. They're at the top of the food chain in all of this, in the sense that the artists, the producers, the guys who are actually creating the substance and the content, they're the ones that we really need to be looked after and looked at first. And they should be prioritized in many ways.
When our eyes are glued to our phones, it can be easy for many to judge that we as a society are becoming all the more distant and impersonal. But for many young people, online worlds are acting as exciting sources of deeper connections than we've ever had before. As Andrew points out, the way we engage with media has changed forever.
Smaller independent creators and journalists, whatever you want to dive into, they've got real communities. They're fostering like real connection. I think that's like the most beautiful thing. There's like an actual connection there where you feel secure, and it comes back to some of those core emotions of like, oh, they understand me. It's like we're sharing these universal feelings and thoughts, and like it's hard to connect with a logo or a brand name, Like it's not real. It's not a human. And I think people are seeking that out. The more we're getting bombed with content and headlines and images and video and things like that, we're seeking like real connection to actually help cut through.
This connection isn't the only massive change in our media habits though. MTV started all the way back in 1981 and was instrumental in changing music culture, particularly music video culture, forevermore. As Shivani points out, we're going through a change equally, if not more drastic than the introduction of MTV, in how we now approach video from the palm of our hands.
Yeah, the short form content on TikTok where it's like quick, snappy video, audio, visual content has been, I think, very pivotal in the way people are engaging with music media in general. You know, because there's going to be more of them. There's going to be a lot more streaming platforms. There's going to be a lot more social media platforms. I think really being able to mold and make your content adaptable to all these platforms so that the right eyes are on it is very important. And I think as that evolves, so will the content and how innovative it is.
If you use TikTok and you follow local musicians, you'll likely be all too familiar with the quote, "My manager told me to make more TikToks," end quote, discourse. Musicians are regularly complaining that, to be relevant, means not only being a musician, but being a writer, a comedian, host, and promoter of your own life. When that's brought into the realm of music PR, the line between a creative product and its creator becomes all the more blurred, as Melody and Julie explain.
We've had to really diversify the types of content that artists are engaged with as well. And some artists are up for it and they just want to share their music however they can. And so there'll be things like, guides to your hometown or a playlist of some of your favorite artists and all those kind of like listicle things where often the solution from media partners is, well, if you just create the content, we'll post it up. And, sometimes that's fine, but sometimes it's so disappointing when you can't have the artist talk about what they've made. I think it's kind of given artists less of a chance to be able to share more about the thinking behind things and the artistry. And I'm sure that, in some ways impacting the audience because they're getting less and less of who they really are and more just random content. Actually, I won't say the artist's name, but a recent one that came up was we were offered one of our artists the cover of a magazine. And, in the past, that'd be an amazing opportunity and you would get a chance to long chat and so much eyes on the piece because you're on the cover, you do the story, you do the shoot, and then, everyone's happy. What we got with that cover was, in addition to that, you actually also have to do and there was maybe up to 15 different types of content. Maybe 15 is an exaggeration, but quite a long list of content that you had to make for it to go ahead. It's asking a lot of an artist, and now you suddenly have to be comfortable with you being on camera and creating video content, and then you have to also create this playlist, and then you have to do all this other stuff, and it kind of sometimes feels like you're behind the desk trying to tell these artists you have to jump through this many hoops to land one story. It feels like there's all these little moral conundrums that everyone keeps facing with every piece. It's less about just a good artist and a great song and a great message, sharing that with your audience. And there's so many other rules and facets into it that just go into it now that it's a real exchange. It used to be, here's what the artist can give to you. And now you're thinking, and maybe for the better and maybe for the worse, now you're thinking a lot more about okay, we'll give you this and in return we have to give all of these extra things. And yeah, it's more of an exchange. It's more of a formal partnership. Kind of feels like the heart of it sometimes is lost. A lot of people are using Discord. A lot of people are using online platforms and communities to dive directly with their artists. We were just working on the Fred Again Australian tour. For an artist like that, you don't really have to do much to get all sorts of media coverage. But he was, he's put in the effort to build his community and he's gone direct to fans. So, we're finding that sometimes a media platform isn't the thing that's going to change an artist's, growth. I'm a manager as well, and I'm starting to see that, actually engaging directly with your audience and building your newsletters up and you're following there in a real, authentic way that's real to you is the thing that's going to make a difference.
I feel like there are musicians that have these really innovative approaches to how they're getting their music out there. And with Menashe, him and twnty and Josh have kind of just been doing live shows all around Australia all year, all last year. That's all they do, just live shows. They haven't released one song, but they have this huge cult following. And they're just constantly traveling and making music. And I think it's this really interesting approach for artists, getting their music out there and getting heard, especially to like a niche community. I guess it depends what the artist wants out of their fan base. If an artist wants to go global or if an artist just wants to be well known for their music, I guess. If they want to go global, it's helpful to have a label on your side. We can always revert back to that traditional kind of community aspect of artists where you build the community first in your like localities, and that's when you'll blast off into being known globally.
But where do we actually go from here? Unlike other issues facing the music industry, like funding, consumer habits, and equal opportunity conversations, the shrinking media landscape is a beast that, very understandably, feels impossible for any one group to change. But is it a matter of standing our ground, getting out of the way, or joining the ride to just see how far it goes?
If there's one thing I do feel that keeps media moving forward, it's probably listening to the next generation and not just being stuck with a certain demographic. I'd say a lot of media brands end up having to find themselves dealing with where it's very hard for them to pivot away from what they're used to.
Thank you so much for listening to our episode, The Shrinking Music Media Landscape, and to our guests, Andrew Cotman, Julie Fenwick, Melody Forghani, Arun Ramanathan, Shivani Sharma, and Cyclone Wehner. On behalf of EMC, we hope that this discussion can act as a moment of reflection, inspiration, and information for any music fan, creative, or professional. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we chat with UK artist Jam Supernova about what it means to be a DIY artist in 2024 and beyond. My name is Jack Colquhoun, I've been your host, and this episode was produced in partnership with TAFE New South Wales by Gig Hope. Thanks for listening.